The final chapter on JFK, Chapter 19, Segment 4, The Windshield.
Welcome back. This is another segment in our chapter, Yes, No, or Maybe So, the windshield. And the reason the windshield falls into this chapter is because we don't definitively know the answer as to whether or not a bullet went through the windshield from the front of the car and entered the limousine, or whether it was a fragment coming from behind the vehicle and embedded itself into the windshield. This famous photo shows the crack in the windshield to the Kennedy limousine. And from my personal perspective, when I saw that, I've always been under the assumption that it wasn't a shot from the front, because no one would take a shot from the front trying to go through glass to hit anyone within the limousine cabin. However, I may not be right. The problem with the front windshield in the Kennedy limousine was that the windshield may have been destroyed, at least according to some witnesses, and there were not a lot of photographs taken of the windshield itself, or specifically of any crack or damage to the windshield, allowing investigators and afterwards researchers to look at the Kennedy front windshield to prove undeniably that a shot either came from the front or the back. It should be noted that when bullets strike auto glass, especially the front windshield, it makes two types of marks, one for an entry and one for an exit. And the marks are entirely different in the glass. In the Kennedy assassination case, multiple problems existed. The first was that the FBI and the Warren Commission itself took the position that no bullet went through the front of the windshield in the Kennedy limousine, and that the only thing unusual that existed in the front windshield was that a small bullet fragment was found on the inside of the windshield, which created a tiny crack. To date, there have been approximately 7 people who have said that when they looked at the front windshield of the limousine after the assassination, there was a small hole that went through the front windshield glass from the front into the cabin. 3 of those people were Dallas motorcycle police officers. One of the other people was a nurse and firearms expert, and she noted that there was a bullet hole through the front of the limousine glass with a hole big enough to fit a pencil through. And of course, a Ford Motor Company employee by the name of George Whitaker, he noted a hole through the front of the windshield, and he said that the windshield itself was broken up and scrapped by his staff on orders from above. The problem for me as an assassination researcher is that with no clear photographic evidence, all it is a he said, she said. So of course, in this case, we went out and purchased the front end of a 1961 Lincoln Continental, took the part with the windshield, went out to the desert, and since we didn't have an exact distance to shoot, we elected to shoot rounds of different types of bullets at the windshield at a distance of 70 yards or 210 feet. We also did not know what type of bullet was actually fired at the windshield, whether it came from the front and went through or the back as a fragment. So we used various rounds, which included a .22, a .221, a .223, a 6.5, 30-06, and a .308. Here are some photos of the Lincoln Continental windshield And as you can tell, it's riddled with bullet holes in this safety glass. Strangely, and I mean strangely, it didn't really matter what caliber bullet we fired at the windshield. They all made, to a degree, similar size holes in the windshield. And in fact, there is a photo of a person pointing at two bullet holes, which are, if you can believe it, from that size, made by a .22 caliber rifle. And in fact, a paper chart shows a number of entrance holes and exit holes from various caliber bullets, including a .22, again showing very small holes. But yet in the Lincoln Continental windshield that we fired at, none of the holes were small. None of them were tiny. Now, it appears clear, at least from our test, that most common caliber bullets that are fired from the distance we were firing it at, 70 yards, hitting the safety glass of a 1961 Lincoln Continental front windshield makes a larger hole than one would expect. And all bullets that hit made a relatively similar size hole in the glass. So with our yes, no, or maybe so chapter, if we look at the results of our lay tests on a 61 Lincoln Continental windshield, it would appear that any shot that was fired at the Kennedy limousine from a 70-yard distance or so would have gone through the windshield and would have made a very large, noticeable hole rather than a small pinhole or a hole that a pencil would go through. But from our tests, it would seem that the most likely scenario would be that a bullet came from the back, and if you recall when we just talked in a prior segment about the windshield frame, the bullet hit the top of the windshield frame where it's bent or rolled over the strongest area of the frame, and by hitting there, a bullet fragmented, causing a particle or two to break off from the inside of the vehicle and hit the windshield from the inside, leaving the fragments that were found by FBI agent Frazier when he was examining the vehicle. That, of course, does not explain Warren Commission Exhibit number 351 and claimed to be the windshield that was in the Kennedy vehicle at the time of the assassination. And with that said, let's first start with this. No one has ever supplied a chain of custody receipt for the windshield that's sitting in the National Archives today. That, of course, brings us to a doubtful or questionable yes, no, or maybe so as to whether a shot went through the front of the windshield and into the limousine cabin. But what we do know for certain is the windshield that is sitting at the National Archives is not the windshield that was in the Kennedy limousine when the assassination happened. With that said, see you in the next segment.